Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Tejendra Sharma, Professor, Department of Commerce, Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra. Today we are going to discuss the topic Leadership Styles in China. Students, after completing this module, you will be able to understand the concept of leadership style in context of China and also do comparison of the leadership styles in Japanese, US and Chinese companies. Students, as you all are aware, China has emerged as an economic superpower of the 21st century, and any firm aspiring to become a great firm needs to do business with China. With its history extending to over a couple of millenniums, China is a very interesting place to do business. It's a great society with several interwoven aspects encompassing its philosophy, governance, living, and also the style of managing the business. Students, Chinese culture is really very unique from the rest of the world and has an interesting blend of the values nurtured over centuries with the assimilation of modern thoughts and technologies. Every country of the world does business with China, and almost every company has direct or covert inputs into its business which come from China. In order to understand the management style in China, students, it's really very important to understand the Chinese society, as management style of any society are a reflection of the manner in which the members of the society conduct themselves. The relationships and the communication within the firms has a reflection of the culture of the society. Also, China is an interesting case of how a single party ruled nation can assimilate such a high degree of economic liberalism and attain a very high economic growth within a few years. Students, China has allowed the traditional cultural values, Confucian values, and the present day modernity to blend and develop into a unique, symbiotic mix of inputs that facilitate the business in the subcontinent. In order to understand the Chinese management styles, it is really very important that first we understand the Chinese culture and the Chinese values. Students, let's start with Confucianism. Confucianism, also known as Ruism, is a traditional philosophy which governs the way of life in China. The ideas emanated from the thoughts of a Chinese philosopher, Confucius, who lived around 551 to 479 BC and who gave the principles of good life. Confucianism is a unique blend of values for the individual, the family and the individual. With regards to the ordinary activities of human life, especially the human relationships as a manifestation of the sacred, focusing on the practical order. There are three basic ethical concepts and practices in Confucianism. First is the Ren. Ren means benevolence or humanness. The second concept is the Li. Li is the ritual norm of how a person should act in the everyday life. And the third is the Zi, the ability to see what is right and fair in one's behavior. It's these values that form the basis of 5 basic relationships in any society, particularly in the context of China. As an individual stands simultaneously in different relationships with the different people. According to Confucianism, there are 5 basic relationships in a society. First is the relationship between the ruler and the ruled. Second is the relationship between the father to son. Third is the relationship between husband to wife. Fourth is the relation between elder brother and the younger brother. And the fifth is the relation between two equals, that is, two friends. These basic relationships entail the prescriptive value for each of them, and the Chinese society has imbibed and reflected in its conduct as well. Chinese people exhibit certain unique characteristics. In terms of their personal attitude, they're very calm, fatalistic, frugal people. They are stable, calm, patient, and conservative in their outlook. They value education and simplicity despite having power and wealth. In terms of their attitude to work, They are really very hardworking, pragmatic, persistent, and resilient. Students, they are flexible and balanced, and they always avoid the extremes. This makes them an ideal human being to work in any organization. Unlike their Western counterparts, who are guided more by rationality and utility, Chinese people are abstract, systemic, and relational. In terms of their relationships with each other, there is a very high sense of obligations. It's really very important that the five basic relationships which were explained above, you will find that in first four, there is a relationship between a superior and a subordinate, implying that both need to have a sense of obligation towards each other in order to maintain the power balance between them. Ethical behavior demands that the inequalities in these relationships must be respected. Empathy and affection form the basis of these relationships. Mostly, Chinese people are peaceful, gentle, polite, hospitable, friendly, and reserved. In terms of relationships with the groups, Chinese are loyal to their family, particularly the blood relations, but there is a weaker relationship with the bigger units. Generally, you will find Chinese people are apolitical. Thus, the order or the senior person would automatically receive the respect from a younger person, which extrapolates into the organizations as well. So, students, with this background, this Confucian approach influences the relationships within the organizations as well. Unlike the Western approach to relationships based on authority and responsibility alone. In addition to this, it's really important that we discuss another concept, the concept of gunaxi. Gunaxi, which refers to the basic dynamic personal network of influence, which is a central idea of the Chinese society. The personal relationships have a profound effect on the management and leadership styles in China, as people will trust only when they know someone, unlike the Western style, which is highly task oriented. Students, let us now understand the features of leadership style in Chinese companies. Let's know the leadership style. The leadership style adopted by the leaders is directive leadership style. They give the directions to do the actions to their subordinates. Group leader. The leader acts as head of the group or the committee. He is a decision maker. Result oriented. Chinese leadership style is more result oriented by achievement of specific goals and objectives, means more respect to the leader. Relationship management. The leaders believe in making relations with the members. Once the people have belief in their leader, they follow him willingly and passionately. Communication. The communication in China is generally top down. Harmony. The emphasis is on making the organizational harmony. The focus is to avoid the confrontations. The leaders generally resolve the conflicts amongst the team members and try to maintain the harmony within the organization. Coaching and development. For successful leadership and for attracting high quality talent management in the organizations, mentoring, coaching and development are important tools in the hands of leaders to attract and retain the talent in the organizations. China has emerged as the world's second largest economy in terms of its GDP and growth rate. On the average, the annual GDP growth rate in China crossed 10% and surpassed Japan in 2010 to become the second largest economy in the world after US. With these developments, the growth of Chinese business continued to expand, and the Chinese companies have established their offices of operations around the world. In the global presence, the companies have to integrate both Chinese and Western perceptions into management practices, including the leadership styles. Leadership in China is a characteristic of both Japanese and American practices. The leadership style used in China is generally directive. The relationship between the leader and the subordinate follow the parent-child relationship as the transactional analysis items. The leader is the head of the group or the committee. The orders of the leader are expected to be obeyed by the subordinates. Leadership in Chinese companies is also guided by the common values and harmony as believed in the Japanese leadership style rather than confrontation as in the American leadership. However, communication is top down as is done in many American companies. To find leaders is a challenging task for the Chinese companies due to increasing cultural factors. For a long time, the leadership style of Chinese companies was based on mutual respect and togetherness amongst the individuals. In order to meet the global competition, new Chinese leaders acquired leadership qualities that can meet cross cultural challenges. Chinese leadership style is based on collectiveness rather than individualism. People prefer to become a part of the group rather than being individuals. Individualism is ranked low in the Chinese companies as compared to other countries, as is found in many studies. Communism, Confucianism, colonialism, and capitalism are the 4 C's adopted by the Chinese culture. Chinese leader very much focus on getting results and managing the relationships. Also, they tend to be hierarchically superior in authority. The Chinese leaders expect good loyalty and obedience among their team members, although the leaders have the overall responsibility, and the leaders get the feedback informally and avoid open discussions and maintain the group harmony. However, students, China is rapidly adapting itself to the changing trends. Researchers have found that Western leadership styles are changing with the growing focus on more humanistic elements of leadership. The worldwide increasing focus on the human rights, which is incorporated into the Chinese traditional values as well. Further, Chinese leadership emphasizes more on the individual contribution of the employees towards achieving the economic results. With the changing trends, the Chinese leaders are integrating the Western leadership approaches due to education in the foreign countries and multinational companies operating in China. The main focus is on adopting more scientific approaches regarding the management, that is efficiency, standardization, and automation of the processes and elimination of the wastages. The integration will help Chinese businesses to gain from the increased focus on the innovation and efficiency. On the other hand, the main benefit to the Western businesses will be from the improved employee relationships. Ancient Chinese philosophy is absolutely rooted with the traditional Chinese leadership practices, which are more influenced by the traditional Chinese values such as incorruptibility, sense of shame and morality, etc., with an ultimate focus on improving the performance of the employees via personal development. Chinese business environment turns the expectations of the leaders more towards fulfilling the ethical considerations over and above the achievement of the profit. Other fundamentals of Chinese leadership principles include assuming the role of inspirational character, leading by example in terms of promoting quality, and simple living and harmony with nature and others. According to a study published in Harvard Business Review in 2014, Chinese management practices are characterized by 3 major leadership styles. That is, leadership style with simple organizational structure, leadership style with localized value prepositions, and leadership style when the products are to be developed at a quick rate. These are discussed herein. Leadership styles with a simple organizational structure. Chinese leaders are notorious for controlling the companies from top. What is less well known about them is how much they decentralize. It helps them to respond to the market shifts and swiftly growing business structures. Chinese business environment is characterized by a constant rate of adaptation, which requires on the part of leaders not just to keep pace with the markets, but also with the differences that are to be faced in the development process of each area and the power of local officials. However, these differences are witnessed to be blunt in nature. That's why the Chinese companies construct the business structures that give business units nearly total autonomy, as in the case of Media, China's second largest home appliance maker. Media is characterized by its various product lines which operate as independent businesses rather than as part of larger matrixed organizations. And each independent business unit has a leader responsible for its activity. Thus, the focus is put more and more on fixing autonomy and accountability. Chinese enterprises can afford to employ more and more people as it produces more in house and pay employees less than their counterparts. Further, a country characterized by little or no access to more or less business infrastructure is left with only single option to grow, that is to ensure the growth of manpower exists within the country. Moreover, Chinese leadership initiators rely more on the direct reports to the possible extent. These leaders consider the concept of decentralization and flat structures to the possible extreme. Companies in China operate in two main frames. According to Chinese initiators, they usually appoint two managers. Each one is self-directed and responsible for one time frame and thus competing effectively for the scarce resources. It can be said that Chinese leaders prefer direct conflict over a more complex one and a cooperative management structure. Leadership style with localized value propositions. Most of China is still at the developing stage, which means that it is characterized by inexperienced customers, overcapitalized companies, no proper branding, and unique local business customs and traditions, etc. What is quality? Simply, quality reflects the local needs. Its best example is Sany, the top construction company in China. It demonstrates how different is the assignment of adapting to the local customers and government than others. Acclimatizing its equipment offerings for the local leasing companies enables them to compete on their preferential access, not on durability. Further, it helps to keep their capital commitments down by having the option of demand financing. Further, it has also used the very local distribution systems. It considers how managers who know more people at various places ensure a quick and a reliable way to go to the market. Third is the leadership style when the products are to be developed at a very quick rate. The rate at which Chinese companies develop new products for its existing technologies and by upgrading its large scale production is very high. And it's also quite impressive. It's crucial reason that Chinese have come to dominate the global market. The ability of the manufacturer to launch new and latest offerings is by the product of heritage. Companies like Media, Wangxiang, and Good Baby started out manufacturing those goods that they didn't design. They cultured themselves about how to deal swiftly to meet the buyer's demand for speedy improvement. To adapt designs that requires other alternative material instead of the original materials that might be too expensive or unavailable at that particular period of time. To transform equipment so that different products could be produced with the same equipment and above all keep the costs down without compromising on the quality aspect. Students, now let's compare the Japanese, US and the Chinese leadership styles. We'll compare them on different bases. As we can see, the leadership style of Japanese companies is basically paternalistic style of leadership, whereas US and China, they both follow the directive style of leadership. The approach of leaders in Japanese companies act as social facilitators and as member of the group. Whereas in the US companies, the leader acts as the head of a group and decision maker. And in Chinese, leader also acts as the head of the group and the decision maker. In terms of decision making, in the Japanese companies, the decision making is done through the group decision making. Whereas in US, it is done by the individuals. In China, it is also done through the group decision making, just like the Japanese companies. Confrontation. More emphasis is on the harmony and there is avoidance of confrontation in the Japanese styles. Whereas in US, there is a face-to-face confrontation which is quite common. Chinese usually lay emphasis on harmony and they also want to avoid the confrontation. In terms of control mechanisms, the Japanese imply informal and rely heavily on the trust. Whereas US, they follow the explicit style, that is rely more on what to control and how to do it. Whereas Chinese leadership style is implied and informal, resembling more like their Japanese counterparts. In terms of the approach, the Japanese and the Chinese both have a collective approach, whereas the US leadership style is highly individualistic in its approach. Social responsibility for Japanese companies as well as Chinese companies is very high. Although Chinese companies are not only having high social responsibility, they are also having high outcomes. Whereas US leadership style, it's a bit high. As far as communication is concerned, in the Japanese companies, they follow both way communication, that is top down as well as bottoms up. And it also includes the informal communication. Whereas the US, they generally follow the top down communication, more formal and in the written form. Whereas Chinese leadership generally follows top down communication. So students, we find that Chinese leadership style resembles with American style as well as Japanese style in certain aspects, and in certain aspects it is different from them. Students, now let's try to see how globalization has impacted the Chinese leadership style. Globalization and competitive environment has changed the operational environment of the world as well. The developed countries are expanding their businesses globally. Developing countries are also trying to expand their markets internationally. In order to become successful at the international level, effective global leadership is really very important for the multinational companies. Global leaders easily learn and adapt according to the cross-cultural differences, working environments, political parties, effective communication before entering the new markets. Western countries have already developed a well internationally as compared to many Asian countries. Amongst the Asian countries, Chinese economy has emerged as the fastest growing economy in the world. Many of the multinational companies have entered China to locate new markets and supplies. Global leaders were taught to have multicultural leadership skills to lead their organizations and to operate in China. The leaders are taught to respect the traditional Chinese values. Chinese leadership challenges. Students, as you know, China has adopted one-child policy. It has always faced workforce shortage at all the employment levels, including the senior positions. The labor turnover rate is also very high in China's working environment. Chinese employees are free to change their jobs. Hence, their involvement and participation with their working environment is low. Most of the top and executive positions are not open or available for local leaders. Also, most of the multinational companies prefer to employ expatriates instead of promoting the local talent. The local leaders generally claim about the slow training and coaching programs for them to meet the expectations and needs of the organization. The next challenge for global leaders is the education system in China. Chinese education system focuses on memorization and recitation rather than problem solving or strategic thinking. Another challenge for the global leaders is the philosophies. Confucianism and Taoism are followed by the Chinese culture. The goals, values, and expectations of the two philosophies are quite different from those of the Western countries. The global leaders easily handle and manage these differences. Due to the rapidly growing economy and various cultural and political differences, the leaders are changing and adapting their leadership skills in the host countries. Confucianism was the most important cultural and business philosophy within China, which existed for over 2000 years. The philosophy had its great impact on the mindset of the Chinese people. The Confucian philosophy focuses on having a harmonious working environment within the workplace and having good social relationships along with the excellent business operations. To be successful in Chinese environment, global leaders adapted to this philosophy. Initially, multinational companies used to employ expatriate leaders in the Chinese offices. However, due to lack of awareness of the cultural differences in China, they shifted their preference to develop their own local talent and provided them training to become effective leaders. So students, now I would like to summarize of what we have learned. As we all know, leadership is the most effective method of motivating people in the organization, and it's through effective leaderships that the managers guide and influence the action of the employees. Leaders help a group to achieve the goals through maximum utilization of the capabilities, and there are different techniques or styles of leadership which are adopted by the managers to take control over the employees and decision making process. As we have already learned in the subsequent modules as well, the major categories of leadership style can be divided into autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. In different countries, leaders adopt themselves according to these requirements of the country, keeping in view the differences in the culture. A lot of difference in the leadership style of China, US, and Japanese leaders can be found on the basis of various dimensions. As far as employees are concerned, decision-making process, corporate social responsibility approaches are concerned, Chinese leadership follows the Japanese leadership style. While on the basis of communication, work efficiency, the Chinese leadership follows the American leadership style. Chinese companies can learn a few things from the Americans. However, the Americans also need to learn certain things from the Chinese as well. In the global presence, the companies have to integrate both Chinese and the Western perceptions into management practices, including the leadership styles. Thank you.